They did not cry when they were captured. They did not tremble in front of the gun barrels. They did not shed a single tear when their weapons were taken away. But they broke down in tears when they were given a hamburger and a can of Coca-Cola. Why did Japanese prisoners of war, who once swore to die rather than surrender and saw Americans as demons, fall apart over a simple American meal? Why was that? What was it in that hamburger and that can of Coke that made them collapse? In your opinion, what was America's most powerful weapon in World War II? The atomic bomb or compassion? If you believe it was the atomic bomb, press like. If you believe it was compassion, press subscribe. This is a true historical story, buried for more than 70 years. A story not just about war, but about the awakening of humanity in the midst of it. August 1944. In the middle of the Pacific Ocean filled with smoke and fire, the destroyer USS Nicholas slowly cut through the waves, carrying dozens of Japanese prisoners captured after a brutal battle. The sea reflected a blood-red sunset, and those men, thin, covered in mud, and broken in their torn uniforms, stood in chilling silence. No one screamed, no one begged, and not a single tear fell. They bowed their heads, not out of fear, but out of pride. The American commander stood on the deck, looking down at the prisoners, and quietly said to his men, "They don't even blink." In that moment, he realized the enemy before him was not only driven by orders, but also by an unshakable belief that surrender was the ultimate disgrace. During the war, the Japanese Empire turned the act of surrender into a sin. A captured soldier was taught that suicide was more honorable than captivity. The motto, "Death before dishonor," was carved into their minds from classrooms to training grounds. Many had watched their comrades pull the pin on grenades rather than live as prisoners. So as the ship carried them toward Hawaii, they felt they were no longer men, only breathing corpses dragged through shame. Throughout the long voyage, they said nothing to the Americans. When given food, they ate silently. When asked their names, they bowed. Some tried to cut their wrists but were stopped. Others stared blankly at the sea, as if searching for the last shred of honor washed away by the waves. Then they arrived in America. The land they had been told was the kingdom of demons. The truck carrying them drove through vast fields in Texas. In the distance were cornfields, grazing cattle, and the faint sound of church bells from a small town. A few children on bicycles followed the convoy, peeking curiously inside. A blond boy waved, smiling as if it were a parade. One Japanese prisoner bowed his head, avoiding the gaze. He did not understand why the Americans smiled at their enemies. The camp stood in a sun-scorched plain surrounded by barbed wire. But what shocked them was not the guards or the rifles on the towers. It was the small white wooden houses, clean beds, kitchens with smoke rising, and a little sign that read, "Camp Cook Mess Hall 2. An American officer spoke slowly through an interpreter. "You are not criminals. You are prisoners of war. Here you will be treated as human beings." No one believed him. They bowed their heads, thinking it was propaganda. But that first night, they were given warm blankets. The next morning, they were allowed to bathe in hot water. When the guards handed them bread and coffee, many looked at each other in confusion. The enemy served breakfast. In Japanese military culture, being a prisoner was shameful, so being treated kindly made them feel ashamed. Some ate quickly, heads lowered to hide their tears. Others murmured prayers to their ancestors, not knowing whether this was psychological warfare or mercy from God. One prisoner named Nakamura, then 23 years old, later wrote in his diary, "I don't know who I am anymore. The Americans feed me, while my country taught me they were demons. I eat, and my heart trembles. For the first time I feel hunger, like a human being." Camps like this appeared across the United States, from Wyoming to Nebraska, from California to Texas, but everywhere it was the same. They saw the American flag flying, farmers working, and children playing baseball beyond the fences. No one threw stones. No one shouted insults. Some Americans waved or tossed in packs of chewing gum. These small gestures left the prisoners confused. In their minds, the enemy was supposed to be a beast, not someone who could smile. Day by day, life in the camp took on a strange, normal rhythm. Prisoners worked on farms, planted corn, cut wood, and sometimes sang while they worked. Some learned English from guards, writing their first words on the ground with a stick. "Thank you." A few American officers began to admire their discipline and dignity. No one tried to escape, no one rebelled. But deep inside, the prisoners were breaking. They had nothing left to believe in. Their homeland was half a world away, and the flag of the rising sun was only a memory. At night, in the quiet wooden barracks, many stared at the ceiling and thought, if my mother knew I was captured, she would never look at me again. And some began to cry, silently, not because of pain, but because of kindness. A kindness they did not expect and did not know how to handle. They feared that if they softened, they would betray their country. But if they kept hating, they would no longer be human. The American soldiers could not understand this. They thought the prisoners only needed food and water. But for the Japanese men, what they faced was far more terrifying than torture. It was compassion. Compassion, something simple for the victors, became a storm in the hearts of the defeated. It forced them to question everything, their ideals, their beliefs, their honor, even the reasons they were willing to die. In an internal U.S. Army report at that time, there was a short note. Japanese POWs display extraordinary discipline, yet beneath the surface there is deep confusion. Some seem grateful, some seem lost. Grateful and lost, two words that captured the hearts of thousands of men who once believed death was glory. They no longer knew whether to hate or to thank, or whether they could live with themselves after experiencing mercy from the enemy. War can destroy cities and flatten villages, but sometimes a simple act, a blanket, a smile, a meal, can break an entire system of belief. They remained silent, still without tears. But inside, their fortress of pride had begun to crack. And from that crack, before long, the first tears would fall, not from pain, but from the realization that war had taken everything. Yet kindness still remained. And sometimes, a hamburger and a cold can of Coke can help a man find his humanity again. June 1945, midday, the Texas sun hung high in a blazing white sky. The air was thick with heat, warping the railroad tracks around the camp as if they were melting. The Japanese prisoners had grown used to their daily routine. Waking at 6, lining up for roll call, working the fields, then returning to their barracks for lunch. No one spoke. No one smiled. The sound of boots crunching on sand was the only thing that broke the silence. But today, something was different. From early morning, a strange smell drifted through the air. Rich, sweet, slightly burnt. Part meat, part melted butter. It was nothing like the sour rice or thin soup they were used to. A few prisoners stood near the fence, peering through the gaps in the barbed wire. Behind the kitchen, American soldiers were grilling over charcoal, the sizzling of meat echoing in the wind. Barbecue, one guard laughed to another, flipping the meat as he licked his lips. From inside the WWII, the Japanese men stared silently toward the smoke. Nakamura, the young prisoner, inhaled deeply. The scent brought back memories of summer fairs in his hometown, when his mother would grill mackerel over hot coals, the smell of oil spreading through the yard. Then he remembered. His mother had died in a bombing raid over Tokyo. The city was now ash. He turned away, biting his lip until it bled, trying to push the memory aside. Noon came. The barrack door opened. A tall, broad-shouldered African-American lieutenant stepped in, carrying a wooden tray filled with round sandwiches, something the prisoners had never seen before. Beside them were silver cans marked in red letters, Coca-Cola. He spoke cheerfully, with a few broken words of Japanese. "Lunch. Today, special." No one moved. They thought it was a test, a trick meant to humiliate them. An older prisoner muttered in Japanese, "Don't eat. They are testing us. That is the food of devils." But their stomachs growled in protest. They were hungry. For months, they had lived on dry bread, canned beans, and watery soup. The American soldier smiled, sat down, and cracked open a can of Coke. Pssh! The sharp hiss of carbonation filled the air, like an unfamiliar song. Bubbles fizzed, cool vapor rising. He took a sip, then gestured toward them. "Try it." Nakamura looked around. No one dared to move. Finally, he stepped forward, bowed his head, and gently accepted the sandwich from the soldier's hand. The bread was still warm. The smell of beef, onions, butter, and ketchup blended into something almost magical. He hesitated for a moment, then took a bite. In that instant, everything inside him stopped. The meat was tender, soaked in savory sauce. The bread smelled of fire and smoke. The salty, buttery taste spread through his mouth like a strange enchantment. Then he took a sip of Coke. The cold fizz slid down his throat, the bubbles popping on his tongue, the sweetness flooding in. He looked up, his eyes wide. And then, tears fell. Not because it tasted good, not because he was hungry, but because in that moment, he realized he was still alive. A living man, not a machine, not a failure, not a demon, as he had been taught to believe. Just a man, eating a simple lunch offered with kindness. The American soldier looked at him, confused. "Hey, you okay, buddy?" Nakamura said nothing. He bowed his head, shoulders trembling. And then something no one expected happened. One man, then another stepped forward to take a sandwich. An old prisoner took a bite and began to weep. A group of young soldiers fell to their knees, eating and sobbing. The sound of crying filled the air, first quiet, then uncontrollable. Men who had fought to the last breath at Guadalcanal, who had killed and watched their comrades die, were now crying like children, crying over a hamburger. A few American guards stood in silence, watching. One whispered, "Jesus, I didn't expect this." None of them understood the collapse happening inside those men's hearts. A prisoner named Ito clutched his sandwich tightly, tears streaming down his face. He whispered, "Why? Why are they kind to us?" No one answered. Only the wind and the smell of grilled meat filled the air. From the corner of the barracks, an elderly Japanese officer watched, his face cold as stone. He stood up and shouted in Japanese, "Enough! You disgrace our country's honor! Eating the enemy's food is betraying your ancestors." His voice cracked, trembling with fury. But no one stopped. No one could. Because in every sip of Coke and every bite of bread, they found something that war had stolen: human kindness. The old officer stormed out, eyes burning with hatred. But then he stopped. A young American soldier passed by, paused, and bowed his head in greeting. No mockery, no scorn, just a genuine bow between two men as equals. In that moment, the hatred inside the officer cracked too. He turned away, and for the first time in years, he felt his throat tighten. That afternoon, no one worked. The camp was unusually quiet. Some prisoners sat by the fence, staring into the distance. One held an empty Coca-Cola can, shaking it gently to hear the rattle of the little metal ball inside, as if trying to hold on to the sound of a memory. A few others took scraps of paper and began writing letters home. Nakamura wrote, "I don't know what to say, Mother. Today I ate American food.